We're good? Okay.
Are we live?
Are you sure?
I will check.
All right, I see our beautiful faces pop up and teaspoons or whatever he's doing.
Fell off.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another class from the DMing Academy. This week we're gonna be talking about cartography and world building in your homebrew worlds. I am your headmaster, Dogood. You could find me on all the social crap at DogoodHVZ. We have our lovely Mr. Dr. Professor Words. Would you like to say hi?
Is this where I'm supposed to give my spiel?
Yeah, give a small spiel.
I thought you were just doing a cursory introduction.
Provide us with a bit of spile.
Well, my name is Words for Sale. As you can, not actually see on the screen because it says Mr. Dr. Professor Words. That is actually the title that you should be addressing me as. I am on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch. I DM a game with our headmaster as one of my players on Wednesday nights on my channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am also on That One Blonde Nerds D&D campaign as a player. On Tuesday nights, we affectionately call it ADHD&D because all of us have ADHD, so it's kind of a wild ride. I'm here, obviously. And tomorrow, I'll be on Andrew and Baxter's channel for a calls it Houses of Barovia, which is a homebrew version of the Curse of Strahd campaign. So I'm playing a bugbear paladin that wields a lance, so he has 15-foot reach. It's pretty fun. I think that's about it.
That was some good spiel.
If you want to see my face,
I enjoyed that spiel.
Follow me.
It is a lovely face, and that is a lovely mug.
Sexy man.
That was product.
Joe with a degree. Or this week, Joe the cartographer. Because that is your degree.
Hello, Terminator.
You're going to be over on TikTok as
Joe. Joe, you're very robotic, darling.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Bye.
Joe is not human, he's actually a robot.
While Joe is figuring out his stuff, Teaspoon.
Hello, I am your local teaspoon. You will find me on TikTok at Weaponized Teaspoon, and I'm not giving any of my social medias because it's rubbish and I don't use them. So, yes. Hi!
I closed Discord. Did that work?
Oh, yes. Okay. Oh. We are aware, Ivy. I'm very crazy.
It's just that, we all love Ivy so much that we just constantly hear her in our minds.
She is our voice of reason, our conscious.
It's just one of those things. Is I think I can even hear her now, laughing and being adorable
and screaming "fuck you."
Oh, I'm just hearing in her voice.
That was definitely a thud on some form of hard surface.
I think it was my voodoo doll.
Bit of a delay.
It takes a while. We're miles apart.
Right. Joe, would you like to make another attempt at your introduction?
So I'm Joe, or as they like to say, Joe with the degree. I am on TikTok as Cartographic Gunslinger, which is probably different to how Ivy has me because I recently changed it. I'm also I stream on Saturdays at 19:30 UTC. on the Heathen Gaming Table or Heathen Gaming Table. So I've literally just come off this stream, come off my stream and come onto this stream. And part of my degree is in cartographic principles, which we'll be going over today. You won't really find anyone that has a full cartography degree unless they're highly specialized.
Do you want a trumpet with that speech?
Trumpet?
Would you like to blow your trumpet?
Oh yeah,
Toot your own horn.
Well, what do you mean? I learned how to do map making through the army, British Army. I served for like 4 years doing operational, socio-political maps.
Might I add, we are thankful for your service.
It was boring. Let's be honest. But part of that, I did a degree in applied computing sciences that focused on geographic information systems. And part of that, like a semester of that, was cartography, which we'll be going into today, along with a bit of terrain analysis. I also take commissions, strangely enough. I don't know how I got to this point. But yes, for my fantasy mapping, I use a software called Wonderdraft. I'm not sponsored or anything. It's just a really nice tool to have. And it's highly customizable and it's very versatile in what you can do. Should we get onto the subject then?
Yes, just before jumping into the subject, I want to remind everyone in the chat that if you ever have questions during the stream, feel free to ask them in the chat. We will be saving them and answering them at the end.
Hello, Baxter and Andrew.
And also, yes, hi, Baxter and Andrew.
Baxter and Andrew is my DM tomorrow, so...
Hola.
We do what's normal.
All right, so Joe, would you like to take us away?
Okay, you're right. I don't know whether my map is being shared right now. So when I'm world building, I like to approach it from a geographic angle, because you'll find quite often, more than not, is that cultures are often shaped by the geography that surrounds them. You'll find that some things are useful in one type of terrain and not useful in another, and putting a cultural aspect in the wrong type of terrain just looks way off and is dysfunctional. So the first part of this is the first things that you need to think about is the time feel. Are you looking for a steampunky aspect, a cyberpunk map, modern or medieval? Because this all affects the sort of art style that you're going to use, the colors that you're going to be using throughout, and also your symbology and how accurate it is. Medieval mapping is so inaccurate and it's so bad in terms of what we have now. While with modern mapping, you'll have a lot of shapes, like 2D shapes instead of drawings. And then with cyberpunk, you might have it more digitalized. It's already digital right now. The next part of it is, if you're wanting to print off these maps, you're going to need to start thinking scaling. If you're making a world map, I would put it on. I have cats in the background. I'm ever so sorry.
Hi.
So if you're doing a world map, you're going to want to put it on an A0. I don't know what the equivalent is in America. I think you just measure it by inches. But basically, you're going to need a plotter to print this thing out. Otherwise, your map scaling and your legibility is going to be affected by the fact that your map is too small. Level of magic. Now, this, in terms of cartography, only affects the fact that you're going to have some weird ass geography, floating mountains, and like huge trees, and different weird bits of geography, and the purpose of the map. Too often I see people cram in as much information into one map as possible, and it makes it confusing, it affects your legibility, and it makes it, especially if your players have a hard time differentiating, is going to make it highly confusing as to what you're looking at. And you can decide whether it's going to be a topographical map which deals with terrain, which can also bleed into your navigational maps, or is it going to be a socio-political map? Who's friends with who? Where's the language barriers? Where's religion barriers? X, Y, and Z. But once you thought about all of this, I mean, do you guys have anything to comment about on this, or am I good to go on to principles of cartography?
I mean, I'm along for the ride in this because I you know how I am at map building. I literally am the, pardon the language, shittest person around that cannot draw a map.
I will say map making in general, not even just like world maps, dungeon maps, and things of that nature, is probably my weakest aspect as a DM. So
I actually don't like doing it.
I want to get better, and I'm working on getting better. But I'm very intrigued because I've been a part of a few world building things with groups, and like I've seen good cartography for fantasy worlds. So like it's really fun to watch and see bring to life. So
and a good map
I'm an avid listener right now.
Sense of immersion into the world.
Yeah, I mean, is whether you're literally drawing this onto a piece of paper or you're going to the high detail that I am, is going to be good whatever you do. It's just whether you want to start thinking of high details of immersion and do extra planning beforehand as to what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with literally making this map as you go along. And deciding on the fly. It may look a bit funky, but it will work.
Funky.
Yes, look a bit funky.
Funky. Sorry.
Yeah, and even if it's not the professional level that Joe is showing us, as long as it conveys the information that you need your players to understand, you can always get better over time. Don't expect to be a professional out the gate and let that discourage you. Just the fact that you're trying is better than a good chunk of DMs, including myself.
I would say that a lot of the high end maps that you're going to see, these people have had years of practice. For my training, we would spend hours making a map, and then we'd print it off and spend hours with a red pen circling mistakes and rectifying. Then you spend another couple of hours rectifying those mistakes. It takes practice. It takes a lot of practice to get to that level. But if you're wanting to go to the level of using Incarnate or Wonderdraft or the many map making softwares that there are out there, and wants your map to look especially neat and tidy and legible, then these are some things that you can think about while you're doing it. So the first point that we're going to come across in principles of cartography is visual contrast. Basically says it on the tin, you want to, when you're doing colors for your map, you're going to want to do a lot of contrast. You want to be able to tell the difference between everything. You don't want to be confused. Now, an image that I'm showing here. Oh wait, no, that didn't work. Did it work?
Give it a second.
Yeah.
It worked.
It worked.
You are meaning
So-
to show the northern west part of the United States, right?
Yeah, so this is a visual representation of states in the northwest of America. Now, there is no visual contrast between any of the states. It's all you've got is lines on the map. If you were to have a quick glance at it, it's not going to be confusing, but it's not exactly going to be easy to read either. B is a grayscaled sort of good example of what you want to do if you're going to do a grayscaled map. While C, because it's different palettes of the same color, it can, depending on what you're trying to represent, can be quite hard to differentiate. While D is probably the pinnacle of what you want to be looking at, is different color scaling. You want to be able to tell the difference between roads, rivers, mountains, hills. You're right there, Speed.
Yeah, I'm stretching. I'm stretching.
You don't want to leave any gap, any room for anyone to misunderstand what you're representing. This is in particular with political maps, with socio-political maps, and culture maps. If you're trying to represent language barriers, you're not going to want to just leave it up to a line. You're going to want to represent this in a proper way, where there can be no room to misconstrue where that line is. And we'll switch back to Wonder Draft. But this can be done in many ways. It's all about depending on what you're trying to represent and how you're trying to represent it. Is that small mountain? That small mountain. So you end up with a sort of, for example, on the map here, you can definitely tell the difference between land and sea. But if I was to change the theme to, say, paper, there's room to misconstrue what is sea and what is land. So you don't want to leave, and on Wonder Draft I prefer to use the worn, but you can get, and sometimes you can go over the top and get something like this, which to me is very harsh on the eye. You don't want to make it,
It's very blue.
Yeah, it's very blue.
Burns us.
You don't want to make it. You don't want
it
to make.
seems like it's a lot to take in with the different blues on the water.
You don't want to confuse it too much. This is something that I'd use for.
It's actually making me hate it. I want to strangle this
It's
thing.
like, I just want to burn it now. I want to fight that map.
Just fuck this map specifically.
But you can get all sorts of mapping. Some of these are really good. Some of them are really bad.
That's nice. That's nice. That's nice.
That's a nice one.
I like
I'll
that. That's nice.
But you can go over the top and make it too high contrast, and it makes it almost unpleasant to look at. And you don't want that. You want someone to look at it and be able to tell the difference of what you're trying to represent, but also be able to look at it for more than 3 seconds.
Where's my detail? Oh,
The next bit that we'll talk about, the next principle of cartography, is legibility. Now, too often, if I was to reduce the symbol size to say a 15, if I was to say those are mountains, like you would be squinting, being like, how many mountains, how dense is this, whatever.
Or how big is this landmass? 'Cause I mean, seriously, dude, what the fuck?
Yeah. Or if I was just to make a city label about that size, is you need to zoom in to a point where they can read the word city. That's so small it's pixelated. While if I up it to a 32 and make it city, it's still a bit small, but it's easier to read. And if I up it to a 42, it then becomes easier.
City.
Yes.
Yes,
But
I
this
have my
also-
glasses on now.
But this also goes into the fonts that you use. If I was to switch the font to this, for example, it'll be easier to read because it's bold, it's flatter, it's easier to read, and it stands out. If I was to zoom out a bit more, you'd still be able to see city. If we press start in,
Going robot again.
Darling, you're robotic.
how about now?
Better.
Okay. Wonder Draft doesn't seem to like whatever we're using. Okay. But the way that we practice this in real life, if you're printing off your maps, if you want to be able to read your own labels, print it off, stand back by about 6 feet, 2 meters. And if you can read your labels from that distance, then that is good legibility. If it's too big, you'll notice very quickly because it'll take up half the map. And if I switch over, a good example in a picture would be this. So, for example, again, Northwest America, you have labels for each state. Now, A is hard to read. B is easy to read. In C and D, they're both representing mountains and density of mountains. But with C, you can barely see them. They're pinpricks. And D is a good legible symbology for mountains. I know this might be a bit boring.
I feel like I need to wear my glasses, and these are for distance, not reading.
I mean, yeah, it can be like that sometimes.
It do be like
But it do be like that. But that's where you need to start thinking about your legibility. If you can't read your own labels or symbols, then there's no hope that your players will. There'll be constant questions, and it also don't pick weird and random symbols for cities. A good way that I represent the difference between town, city, and capital is with the capital, I put a star with a circle around it. For a city, it's a dot with a circle around it. And for towns, I put a dot. That way, you don't even need to, once you've read the legend once, you can just look at the map and straight away you know what you're looking at. Figure ground is a hard one to do on Wonder Draft.
You're a little robotic again. By a little.
Yeah, it hates.
Joe, I have a quick question. Are you part cyborg?
Definitely.
Are you a Cyberman?
Delete.
Right. So figure ground, this is what highlights the object of your map. A good way to do this is one of four ways. A represents a closed form. You exclude everything but the figure. Now, you're not going to do this for world maps. You'll be doing it for country maps or regions. And at the border, you just exclude everything that's outside of it and just whitewash it. The second form, which is B, would be whitewash, is where you keep the contrast and keep the color and symbology in your focus, but you keep everything outside and you put a layer of white mute, and it mutes everything around your object, your focus, so you can better focus on what you're looking at.
See, I see the B one a lot in games as well.
Mm.
Like with the obviously it still shows you the region outside the actual map, but yeah, that's quite. I've seen that one before.
Yeah, it tends to be a favorite when you're representing countries and stuff like that. When you're mapping a country, you don't tend to want to include anything minor from other areas. You include something major like a major city or its boundaries, but you won't include small towns or terrain. C is a drop shadow. So what you do is you embolden part of the border to make it look like it's raised. You don't do anything else to the map, but this just brings it to the front to bring it into focus. And then D is a feather. So you kind of half erase everything around, but you keep some of the information of the surroundings. So then people can find the neighboring country easily enough, know what's on the outside, but it still keeps the focus on what you're trying to represent. So, any questions on that so far, guys?
I mean, I've got none. Does anybody else have any?
No. I mean,
No.
this is
Very informative. I mean, I'm learning a lot.
and like, we can probably briefly just touch on the importance of a map, and like as far as whenever you do world building and things of that nature, and especially if you really want to like invest in a campaign with your party, even if it's just like for your party and you don't plan on publishing, like a map just really helps with the immersion. And like these details, like it may seem a bit dull to some of you, which like as someone with ADHD, like I'm listening, but it's one of those things. It's like this is a lot of information, there's a lot of detail, it's a lot of not what you might think as a fun aspect of D&D, but like it really adds the immersion. And even doing half of what Joe is describing, like it's really going to up your just overall experience for your players. And so like I appreciate this information greatly, because like I said, map making is my weakest part. Like, but it's also one of those things. Is like it's a lot of information. It's a lot to deal. It's a skill. It's definitely a skill that it takes time and to practice. So like all these little tips really add value to the process.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get that it's not exactly thrilling, but like, personally, like before you even step into starting to think of geography and representing geography, you need to, like, these are going to help you represent it properly. and helpful.
I don't mean to call you boring. I'm not saying that you're boring or anything like this. I'm just saying, like, I know, like, from me, like this type of information, it's a lot, like, and it's not saying it's bad. It's just like it's these details and things of that nature. It's like the more tedious things, and like it doesn't make it a bad or awful thing. It's just like it's one of those things that, like, when you think of D&D and world building, you're like, I'm just gonna like create this awesome thing and all this lore and stuff like that, and then like you forget a map and you can't, and your players are asking you like, yeah, how far it is from this town to this town. You're like, I don't know. But like map making helps with all of that, and it's very important.
Oh yeah, definitely. Fortunately, there's only 2 more parts of principles of cartography. Then we can actually start talking about geography and getting into nitty-gritty of mountains and seas and islands and everything else like that. So I don't actually have an image for this one because it's more of a nuance. Hierarchical organization. If it doesn't need to be in the map, don't put it in. You don't need to put in every tree and village and windmill and the occasional farm or field, because especially at world building stage, it's going to be too busy if you do that. Leave that out and put it into a regional map or even a map of a village, if it's that much in detail. A good rule of thumb that we had is, for a country map, if it was less than, in fact, no, for a, I'm going to talk scale here, 1 in 250,000 scale map. That's where 1 meter is 250, 1 centimeter is 250,000 centimeters real world. If the woodland is too small, as in if it's less than 100 meters squared, leave it out. Don't include it, because the map will be too busy, way too busy. Instead, focus on things that are important. Stuff like cities. Make the label larger, especially for capital cities. Put more prominence in your labels. So a country label would be bigger than a city label would be bigger than a town label would be bigger than, etc., etc., etc. And balance. This one is hard to do on Wonderdraft, but with some Photoshop it's easy enough. And it is all about, I have completely ruined everything. Hang on. There we go. It's all about where you place things on a map in relation to the borders. So A is too far.
God, the stream got...
It's good now.
Tech
Sorry.
support.
Did it
What
work?
happened? What happened?
Nothing. You didn't see nothing. Nothing happened.
This was all how we planned it.
Yes. So as you can see, from A through to F, it's placed really badly. F is kind of in center for Africa, while G, H, and I is if you want to include stuff like legends, locators, titles, scales, orientation, compasses, etc. And you've got to start thinking about where you're going to place these in relation to your focus. I is a perfect example of where you would do all of this. And that is it for cartographic principles. Managed to do that in 20 minutes, which is so much quicker than the 3 or 4 lectures I had on this. So I would count yourselves lucky.
And if anybody actually, wants more information, I'm sure you'd be able to like provide more.
Oh yeah, definitely. I can definitely sit down on one of my streams and we want to draft open and talk about these more in depth. But now we can get onto a more interesting aspect, which is aspects of terrain.
You are a complete robot again.
Yep.
While he's figuring out his technical issues, we did earlier in the chat copy paste a couple links to different sources that you can create your own maps on. We are not sponsored, however, we will occasionally recommend different sites or tools that you can use to make things easier for you.
Yeah, Chef. It was Joe likes to robot sometimes.
Yes,
It keeps us on our toes to make sure we're still listening.
it's because of the amount of. I'm not going to swear. I swear I'm not going to swear.
Swearing's my job, okay?
Okay. What if I click on one to draft?
The sweet voice of Ivy in our head says he's good.
What about now that I'm in Wonder Draft? I love this.
Chef, it is not just you. It is when Joe is in Wonder Draft. I don't think his computer can comprehend the fact that he wants to also talk to us audibly.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll open up.
Instead of telepathically.
I'll open up my Pedron Brista map because I need to rework it anyway, and work from that instead of Wonder Draft. Because, you know, technology loves me right now. Okay, so where is my Brista Pedron? There it is.
I swear we're professionals.
So this by no means is a perfect map. It's just an example that we can work terrain from. So we'll go on to aspects of terrain. Before I start any sort of nation building, culture building, I tend to go into geography. You tend to find that the three bits that we're going to talk about are heavily influencing of cultures that surround them. So to begin with, and this is a generalization, there are microclimates out there that occasionally you'll get like a desert that is in Poland. There is a desert in Poland, of all places. So you end up with these weird microclimates. This is just on a general scale. So the first part we're going to talk about is topography. For the other teachers, do you know what topography is?
Yes.
No, I do not.
I feel like I should, and I'm going to kick myself once you tell me.
Words, do you want to give a explanation, or do you want me to do it?
Topography is just the your trees, mountains, the details of the map itself.
So
you could probably give a more educated answer.
Topography deals more in your elevation.
Yeah, that too.
When you're dealing with elevation, I'm not just talking about your mountains, hills. I'm talking about your seas, your lakes, and everything else like that. So a good example of this, especially with boundary geography, in terms of mountains, is stuff like the Himalayas, which lies on the China-India, etc. border. The Alps, which separates a lot of nations in Europe, including Austria, Switzerland, Italy, France, etc., etc. And and to a certain extent, Norway with the Scandinavian mountains, even though Norway pretty much sits in the Scandinavian mountains. Then you have stuff like valleys. They can be split down into like rift valleys, which are formed by tectonic plates, river valleys, which is caused by river erosion. They tend to flood, which makes them fertile. And they can be as pronounced as, say, the Great Rift Valley in Africa. It's very prominent. It's a huge crack in the earth. Or it could be something as subtle as the Vale of White Horse down in Wiltshire, which you can barely tell you're in a valley when you're sitting in it. It's so flat. And then plains. Plains tend to be a gentle, relatively flat or gently rolling flat area. This can have different names in different regions, but it's generally characterized by a grassy vegetation. This can be exampled by the Great Plains in America, or the Eurasian steppes, which goes from Eastern Europe all the way to Mongolia and into China. And you quite often find that this sort of elevation quite often separates a lot of cultures. So, for example, with Italy, there's a Germanic Italic language barrier along the Alps. And then you also have differences between the Indian nations and the Oriental East. So, yeah, it is one of the more important aspects that affects cultures, in my opinion, anyway. Aside from nations that are shaped through colonial means, which tend to have very straight borders because they were formed through agreements opposed to formed through geography. Thoughts on elevation, mountains, hills?
Very tall, pointy things.
Very
Those
tall
are mountains, right?
Those are mountains, yes. But it can also affect soil fertility. So, for example, Scandinavian mountains in Norway, they weren't particularly fertile ground to farm from, which led to the raids happening in Western Europe, which ultimately cataclysmically ended up in the formation of England, which ultimately led to imperial means because of those raids, because of poor fertile ground, less than fertile ground. It had a chain effect on history that spanned millennia. While valleys and rolling hills tend to be quite fertile in the ground. And you see nations literally thriving because of this ground. And it can also affect the weather. So where I live right now, I live on the east coast of Scotland. I am protected most of the time by the Cairngorm Mountains, by the storms that affect America quite drastically. They tail whip and hit Scotland quite badly on the west coast, but because I'm on the east coast, we get some high winds, but it protects us mostly, and we have fertile grounds because of it, because our topsoil is not being stripped. So it can affect a lot.
That's why I've shut up for most of it. That's why I've not really been speaking that much, because I'm just listening to all this because I'm actually quite intrigued by it.
You
could podcast all of this, like, genuinely.
It's
I'm
almost like he's a
captivated.
professional.
You don't say.
We do have a question if you want to, if you have a moment to
Mm.
answer it, or if you have.
Yeah.
The
Go for
question is, how often do you try to make weather realistic to topography versus what you want a region to have? Mountains blocking precipitation from neighboring areas, etc.
I wouldn't be putting snow in a desert all that often. If anything, that would be happening through means. No, I do get the point. Sometimes you can go over the top, but sometimes you can go too little in detail or just throw it out the window, and it can ruin a bit of immersion if you can't explain it in the right way. Like, you're not going to have a delta type swamp in a mountain range. You're going to have marshes in mountain ranges where occasionally you'll have a valley, but you're not going to have something like the bayou in the Mississippi. In the Highlands of Scotland, it's not going to be humid. It's not going to be that cold heat. It's going to be relatively windy. It's going to be cold. So, I mean, it is a sort of tit for tat as to what you want to do, really. But yeah, I mean, what's your guys' opinion on that?
I think when it comes to weather, you are creating a fantasy world, so you can always come up with a fantasy reason why a certain area might be a little bit different than what it would be a realistic location. So, like, what if there was some form of event that created a perpetual thunderstorm over an area where thunderstorms probably normally wouldn't happen? You can do that. Like, feel free to have creative license with your world, but maintain consistency of your explanations. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. Otherwise, I would try to be as realistic as possible. I know one of the links that I linked to Asgard, it tries to do correct topography when it generates the world for you. So if you're not very knowledgeable in making it accurate, there are some places that will help you with that. Otherwise, just don't go so ham, as what Joe was saying. Like, don't be too unrealistic, but don't
overdo it.
Yeah, don't overdo it. Keep it simple, stupid. Always follow the KISS rule, I guess.
I mean, so I in a past world, I had a mountain range interrupted because there was a magical cataclysmic event that happened there, and it caused the mountains to act weirdly, and you ended up with these huge arches and floating mountains, and occasionally a lightning strike will go zap from one to the other, causing hazard. So you can do little areas that you can bend the rules, but you have to be consistent in that area. As soon as you leave that area, then you can go back to real world consistency. But if you want to create something fantastical, then you've got to have a reason, like something in your back pocket to explain away why it's like that. But yeah, I've had floating mountains. I had a weird time trying to map that out because there's no way in my head that I could think of that. But you can bend the rules a little bit. Just be consistent in it, in all honesty. Should we move on to the next bit of terrain, which is hydrography? What's hydro mean?
That thing that we are
Water.
supposed to be drinking.
Yes.
I have no idea what it is.
Did you drink your water today?
Yes.
Get having the foggiest.
So is the geography of water. This deals with oceans and seas, but it also deals with your lakes, rivers, deltas. I don't need to go into too much detail about that. Just keep in mind that as a general rule, rivers go downhill. So you need to think about your elevation while you're doing your hydrography. Rivers tend to go down into valleys, go downhill. You can warp this a bit and have the river reverse, go uphill, but that would be an exceptional circumstance.
Don't make your rivers water parks.
Whee!
But you can create hazard with this. If it's in a particular mountainous area, you can make a river that's filled with rapids and waterfalls and everything like that. So when they're going down this river, it can cause a hazard for your players. Or in the case of a delta, they're hard to navigate. You can end up getting lost in some of the bigger ones. And while they're navigating the rivers, they could get ambushed or something like that. And then the next bit is vegetation, which is basically your trees, grass, or your lack thereof. Deserts are characterized by a lack of vegetation, but also a lack of rainfall. But you have your forests. Here's a bit of a drop for you. Carnivorous and deciduous. They're two types of trees. Carnivorous is your evergreens, your firs, your spruces, your Christmas tree.
Wait, they're not the ones that eat other things?
I mean, I'm talking trees here, but those are those.
It's a forest of carnivorous trees.
I was going to say,
type of tree, or are they going to eat you?
Tree just gets up and grows teeth and just good morning.
All right.
It's like from the Two Towers, but it's a bit more sinister. It's such a tree beard just being asking questions. He's like, I'm going to eat you now.
Yeah.
You're going to be my breakfast.
And then your deciduous is stuff like your willows, oaks, not pines, oaks, birches, those sort of trees. And they actually have different types of roots. So not a Tarrasque. An ogre might have an easy time pushing over a deciduous tree, an oak tree, because their roots aren't as deep-seated, while with the carnivorous tree, they're almost like a corkscrew that goes straight down. So trying to push over one of those is... Put it this way, we tried to push over a spruce with a tank, and it did not work.
Lovely.
So, yeah. And that is it for aspects. We can talk a bit about how we can take these aspects to an extreme in a magical setting. I think we already did this bit with Coniferous Trees.
I was saying, if you can find a carnivorous tree in real life, I will give you a lot of money for the tree.
I mean, there are carnivorous plants out there.
You just need to make
a carnivorous tree.
But
this is where Words is going to Google it and find it.
He's going to find one for us.
I mean, there's the tree sap. I mean, if you have a big enough tree, right, and then the sap starts coming down, and it's the size of a person, like the droplets are the size of a person, and you get stuck in it, it'll be like a jelly monster, the monster manual cubed, like
Gelatinous cubes.
Yeah.
Yeah, gelatinous cube. Could be like a gelatinous cube. So, like, you can have trees that just use their sap to prey on people, or floating mountains, as we said. You can have people that decided to carve whole mansions out of these trees, or vast underground networks that are huge caverns that's formed by this unusual river that, instead of lying on the top surface, has managed to find its way down and create these huge caverns. You can mess around with mineral, like having loads of gems, or the dwarves mined it out and or a mountain collapsed in on itself because dwarves decided to mine it so much that they made it structurally unsafe.
Goddamn dumbasses.
You can do all sorts of stuff with this. And the reason that I pointed them out is actually a lot of cultures tend to be bordered by these things. So the border between France and Germany has the Ruhr and the Rhine, which are hard to cross because they're so wide and deep. You have the Alps between Italy and France, and even forests and deserts. Deserts are a huge one, hard to get across, that you find next to no water. By the time you get to the other, if you're lucky to get to the other side, you're going to be so weak. You could end up coming out the other side absolutely exhausted. Stuff like the Silk Road would become prominent between nations that have a desert between them, where you have a highly specialized caravan that they know their way through the dunes and know how to navigate it. Or you can have a forest that is so dangerous and has such wild predators in there that you need to hire a ranger to navigate you through. Quite literally, these aspects can be so prominent. And I think Matt Mercer actually did this by accident between Jorhas and the Dwendalian Empire, with the mountain range between them. You have it with Tolkien, with the mountain range between them, and also the river between Rohan and Gondor. You have there's a book series that I like called Edgeworld, and there's a forest in there called the Twilight Forest. To navigate through it, you have to latch yourself onto this sort of rail, because you're going to go mad on your way there unless you have these special goggles, which are hard to make. You can do all sorts of geography and play around with it and create obstacle, and you don't have to make a dungeon. You can make an obstacle out of the geography itself for just getting around.
I don't know if I've missed anything. Are we still on the small island that we're currently on the screen?
This isn't actually an island. That's a peninsula of another larger mass. Hang on.
Ah, I see.
If I switch... Oh, hang on. If I switch to that...
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah, it's made a switch, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's gone to the wider view.
Sweet.
Interesting.
So yeah, this is one that I made. It needs reworking. I prefer equirectangular maps.
Here's one I made earlier.
Here's one I made earlier. I made this ages ago. But you end up with, so here, particularly, there's narrow strips of land which these two countries have been at war for millennia, have been at odds for millennia, but because they're only connected by 3 land bridges, you can't. It creates a definite divide between them, and then there's oceans between all of them. There's a marsh down where Baton is. But this actually represents what I was saying about labels and symbology, and not so much hierarchical, but contrast as well. It's not perfect. By no means do I say I'm perfect, but
No, you're perfect to us.
but yes. Do you guys have anything to add to this, or?
No, this is a very thorough and well explained way to build a world from the geographic perspective.
Yeah, I don't think any of us or anybody that I'm aware of could actually even put it in any better explanation.
Yeah.
Like, I'm amazed. I'm practically captivated. I'm just like,
Yes.
And I just love the map that you've built here. Like, that is just awesome.
All right, so I believe that will take us to the break. So when we come back, we're going to talk about world building as far as the lore and the storyboarding, as far as like what are the people in the world, what are they doing other than just the main plot of the story.
Okay. Sweet.
Cool.
Whoop, we're live.
Whoa,
Whoop,
we're live.
live.
Welcome back to part 2 of our lesson on world building.
Yes.
Put my war spoons down and I'll come back.
You don't need the war spoons yet. Combat was last
Yes.
set.
All right. So I guess we'll just jump right into it.
Yeah, take it away, Mr. Doctor Professor Words.
So while we learned the very detailed and skill based world building of cartography and things of that nature, I'm going to be kind of covering more of the world building and the aspect of lore and how to utilize the world that you create, especially in campaigns and storytelling and things of that nature. What you're looking at is actually a preview of my world for my D&D campaign that Joe has been making for me, and I'm absolutely loving it. So I'll kind of use it as a bit of reference. I won't go into too much detail with my actual lore, just because we have somebody in our group here that is actually playing in my campaign, so don't want to spoil anything. But
Ooh, where?
yeah. So what do you do, like when you have this world idea, when you kind of create this map, you have this look of for your world, and you want to use this to tell a story. You want to write something for it, campaign, even if you want to do a novelization of anything. It kind of goes hand in hand. So just making your world a part of your story is very important. Think about the history of this world. How did things get created? So why are there these kingdoms currently here? Why is the landscape the way it is? What did anything happen that affected the world? Was there other civilizations? Was there other kingdoms? Anything of that nature? Any of those little details, especially historical, can add a bit of life to your world, because you can incorporate that into your story. An example that I'm using with my world is there was an ancient civilization that a cataclysmic event happened that wiped out the civilization. But in my world, there's ruins scattered across the entire world that were left undiscovered for hundreds of years. And even if they were found, not many people were, like, no one was actually able to go in and investigate and clear them out, because they just didn't know how to. They thought it was too dangerous, so they just kind of avoided it. Well, my party that I have in my campaign, 10 years prior to this current setting that they're in right now, they were the first group to successfully excavate a ruin. And what happened is it created this boom of a new career path in this world. Aside from just adventurer, they became what we a Argonaut, as I call them, or Argons. And they basically are ruin excavators, and that's their profession. And so for my party, for 5 years, they were like this really popular, they were, essentially celebrities to this world. And then something happened and they disbanded, and 5 years of being apart, they're now back together. So you kind of use that as a way to build a relationship with your group. It adds a bit of lore to the world, and they can kind of play around with things. And that's another thing, is like, use your party to help you create lore. Give them something exciting to work with, especially if they want to have a specific location for where they started, like where they're from, where they were raised. let their backstories kind of help shape some of the things that in your world, or you can kind of adapt their backstories to your world. Don't be afraid to yes and lore unless you have something explicitly set. Let your players kind of have a little bit of freedom. You're all creating a story together, so it's definitely good to involve them in some of that building process. Think of the current age that you want to set your campaign setting in. What's going on? Is there war? Is there peace? What are the political standings of everybody right now? Are they, are there allies? Are they, like I said, about to go to war? One of my kingdoms that I have, the Kingdom of Iverance, and another location called Dorton, which is on the right-hand side. Dorton's actually a protectorate of Iverance. So Dorton isn't its own; it has autonomy, and they are able to have their own kind of governing body, but they answer to Iverance. Iverance is the country that rules over them, and so I'm able to create a lore of how that happened, and like there was a war or a disagreement, and that created this situation. Right now I have the Gravian Empire. Like, they are a newer empire that has started kind of on a war path, but they're being slowed down from various like just obstacles, like the forest there, the mountain range, things of that nature. The Umbara Territory is actually a homebrew race that I created for the world. They are a race of bear people that actually were once dwarves. So. And
wait, how the hell did you go from one extreme to another? How did you go from a dwarf to a bear? Like,
yeah.
Well, they're tiny bears, so
they're not all tiny.
Ewoks.
No. They're not Ewoks. They're not all tiny. In fact, like the one that's in my party is an exception to the race. They're actually more along the lines of the actual size of a bear.
So Chewbacca.
No.
Please continue.
Yeah. But no, yeah. You can create races, or you can use existing races and use them in unique ways that can also help you with creating your lore. There's 2 other races that I created for this world, one called Shade and one called Ethereals. Ethereals is one that I know has been used, but this is like my flavor of Ethereals. And then you can take existing races like Warforged. Warforged are very rare in my world, and there's a specific reason as to why. In fact, my party is starting to learn why, and it's not very fun. Essentially, this isn't a spoiler because the party's already found this out. Essentially, the ancient civilization used the ethereal race as the power source for Warforged. So it was a very taboo thing that was being done, which is yet to be determined whether they did it willingly or was an accidental thing by like, oh, we found this powers like this. On this other plane, we found this really unique power that we can create Warforged with. So that's another dynamic you can use, especially with adding life to your world.
That sounds a little sus to me.
Yeah, it's very sus. But that's the thing is like, these are very interesting things that you can add to your world by creating a history and utilizing that in unique ways to affect your current timeline. And so, think outside the box. You don't have to be so one-dimensional on things. And when another example of that is, a lot of people like to use societal issues within their own worlds, and it's very easy to lean on racism. I personally do not like leaning on that. In fact, I try to stay away from it as much as possible. Not to say that that is not an issue that doesn't exist, but from my perspective, I don't feel like I am going to be a good authority on that. So I like to try to expand on different societal issues that may not be explored as often, which gives a fresher, newer experience for players, especially if they play a lot and experience that kind of really, to me, easy societal issue. So like I like to add things like education. One kingdom has the best schools in this world, and that's the kingdom of Illustria. So unless you have the money or resources to get to that country, your education choices may not be very good, or they just might be limited, or not at all. So education can be something that you can kind of play with, of like, some areas that your party may go to may not be as well knowledgeable, or they may not have the resources for your players to take advantage of, and they're going to have to find ways to get those resources. Another one I like to use, especially with this one, is like the trade and the access to supplies and goods and things of that nature. So again, I kind of placed it into one country. There's one country that is run by a merchant triumvirate, and they control trade throughout the world, mostly through like black market and just their influence and things of that nature. It kind of, bless you, they have a monopoly on trade, and that really greatly affects how supplies and things are distributed and what the cost is going to be like. So in one area, the cost may be pretty high, in another area, it may be pretty cheap. And again, it may be limited resources. So throwing things at your party that they may not necessarily be used to dealing with is really unique and gives kind of a fresh perspective for your players. Make your world living as well. Don't forget that while your players are active and traveling and doing all these things, so is your world. It's going to be constantly changing. Things are going to be happening. So if your party does something big in one area, have the news travel to another area, to where they find out like something happened. Like, you don't have to be like 5 adventurers killed the dragon and be like, the dragon's dead, but they don't really know the story yet. So that can give a way for your party to either like, should we like tell them that it was us, or should we just like let it be, mystery? It depends on if they want the fame or not. So a lot of really interesting things that you can do to build your world and bring it to life, and just kind of make it an interesting story.
Like, don't be. I think as well. Don't be scared to add things that might make it a little bit out there, because at the end of the day, it's your world. Do what you want,
and it's
but
going to
obviously
grow
within reason, of course.
The lore of your world will grow naturally. Even if there's like a subplot that the party decides to ignore, that subplot is still going to happen, and that lore is still going to grow and become its own storyline and change things in the world.
A perfect example is my current party did not find out some information, and when it becomes pertinent, like, they'll end up eventually learning about what they missed, but they will know, like, they won't know that they missed it, but something will happen. And it's one of those things is like, for me, like, I like to set up side quests that they can, because there's always going to be that main plot, but like giving them opportunities to kind of deviate from the main plot and like go do other things. If they miss that other thing still happens.
Like even just they get their money stolen and they choose not to pursue. Maybe that guy took that money to buy something on the black market and he started to grow his own little thing.
But you can also lean a little bit, not into certain aspects of history, but like, for example, particularly in early medieval period, less developed countries, they tended to lean more into hospitality. Instead of you paying to stay in a tavern, you'd be invited to stay at someone's house. They'd be responsible for feeding you and giving you drink and making sure that you were safe as long as you were their guest.
And taking you for walks.
Those facts behind the ear.
Yeah. While with more developed countries of the time, they put more, like there was a lot more emphasis on gold. So it would be hard to find somewhere to rest for free for just being for the fact of hospitality. You'd have to pay to stay at a tavern or a place where you can sleep. And it becomes more monetary, and you can create a sort of cultural difference, not divide, but a difference in view, where because of this monetary, this value in monetary value, someone from that culture can snub someone from the hospitality-based culture, and it's seen as an affront. It's rude. Why would you do that to me? I'm just trying to be a good host. But you can do all sorts of nuances on differences without necessarily going into race. It can just be how that culture has developed, particularly if there's like, for example, on yours, with a highly developed country with a republic right next to a nomadic country, you can have issues like that cross border.
Yeah, like, and that might become something that the players have to deal with. Like, the king of Dragor, like they are, like you said, much more nomadic, very tribal. And that took influences from things like the Dothraki and other cultural influences to kind of shape that. And it's not a race focal thing. It's just the culture of this country has been shaped this way. They do have a leader, but they're mostly a nomadic culture. But yeah, like right next to it is a republic instead of a kingdom. And that's something that you can play with too. Like in my world, the republic is actually new. This is something that recently happened. So there's going to be a bit of kind of like that developmental period where like things are still kind of shaky. There's some uncertainty in the air. There's probably people that were like, why did we have to go to a republic? I was happy under the ruling of the the monarchy.
It's the monarchy
things to deal with, especially on a player's side of things. Of like, they go to this country, what are they going to experience? What is the state that these locations are going to be in? So like, in Dragor, they may not have a lot of cities or towns that they go to because it's more nomadic, so they're going to have to find a temporary, like maybe they do tents and huts and things of that nature that they can move quickly, or it's very open and camping under the stars type deal. And then like the republic, if they go to a city, what's the air is going to be like? Is it going to be easy access? Are they going to find some difficulty because people are sour and angry? if they go to Illustria, where it's very education centered, so they're going to be a little bit more hoity, maybe a little bit more pompous. But if your party's more uncivilized, like how are they going to interact?
Yeah, and when you're looking at the governments that you're throwing into your locations, it also will determine how the party interacts with that government. If you're going to a kingdom, the party, especially if they've got renown, could potentially speak to the king, who has all the unilateral power. Meanwhile, if they go to the republic, they might have to go before a full senate and convince a room of people to side with them or to let them do something.
I think monarchies are a bit more complex than that.
Depends on how in-depth the DM wants to go in on it.
And depends on what sort of monarchy you're basing it on.
Yeah.
Like, is it early England, or is it like more recent England, where the monarchy has next to no power compared to the parliament? So it's like a puppet.
Yeah, so it all depends on how their own system runs.
Yeah. And you can have all sorts of things, like up until 1700 Scotland, like there was a government, but actually if you wanted to deal with the people that were actually in control of a certain region, you'd need to go to the clan leader. You don't go to their representative, you go to the clan leader, and deal with him and trade with him and talk and deal with him instead of the government, who were basically toothless. And that was the early days of Scotland's diplomacy and politics and everything like that, compared to in America, where it's actually quite firm in representatives, and there's not so much of a clan system in place. If anything, there is no clan system. You can still feel the clan system in Scotland here, with particular clans. So it depends where you are and what you wanted to model it off.
And and that's a good thing, is like you can use influences from the things that you enjoy. So especially when you first starting with your world building and things of that nature, like you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have this great detailed expansive lore and world, like something that Tolkien did with Lord of the Rings. You don't have to have that. Have your basics. Have your you can, if you want to do a religion system, you can create just handful of gods, goddesses, deities of whatever. Do that. So you have that which can influence culture. Start out with a small number of kingdoms, so you can start instead of having a large map like I do, just take one of the continents and start there. Think of A Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones. Westeros is a fairly simple country, while there is another continent, most of the story happens in Westeros, and it's a pretty simple setup. It's not a very it's not a very intricate landmass, but the story and the lore and the cities and things like that, that's what kind of brings that world to life, is all the different cultures and how vastly different they are, between the north and just the south. It's real interesting to just play with. You travel 100 miles and it's completely different.
So this map here is a map of Bristafauron. Now, Bristafauron is heavily influenced by like 1700 Scotland. And while it's a whole country and it does have a single government, like each of these little differences in color are actually different clan territories. So even moving 50 miles would put you into someone else's territory. And you don't need to focus on every other country then. You can focus on one, or you can focus on one of these regions. And it's entirely up to you how detailed you want to go. If you want to do a whole campaign in one country, then something like this would be awesome. And then you can do another campaign in a different country, or continue on into do this up to level 13 and then start moving into other world-based missions.
I am going to drop off because I am very tired. I've had a long day at work, and yeah, so I will see you all next time. But I need my Betty Bye advice.
Good night, Teaspoon.
Thank
Okay.
you. Good night. See you later.
See you.
Bye.
Radio.
Okay.
I'm just gonna sit out. I was like, cool, I'll just sit here. Now you all have to put up with me.
I mean,
Don't start with me.
no offense to the lovely Teaspoon, but
Don't
I think
start with
we're
me.
traded up.
Don't start with me. Anyways, continue, Joe. You're good.
Welcome
I'm
to the
just gonna
simping
move your
hour.
camera.
Oh no, I finished with like just focusing in on one country or even a region.
You know, we're sitting here talking about world building, but Ivy, you are my world. Sorry.
Cool.
I had to do it. Anyways, yes. I'm trying to think. I simped too hard. Apparently, I broke
Oh
my
my
brain.
god.
No. Another thing too that you can kind of incorporate that will help with building your world, especially on the storytelling side of things, is what's the weather like? Are there any cataclysmic events that are like sustained? Is there a location where there's like a whirlpool in the ocean, or is there a perpetual exploding volcano? Like, all these different things can affect your world and how your players interact with it, especially if they have to go to these areas. I have a forest that is 100 miles long. That's lore heavy, and it's actually lore important.
Yeah, we'll get to it later.
Yes, you will actually. And yeah, so there's a lot of really fun things that you can play with as far as building your world. At the end of the day, I always refer to my favorite rule of keep it simple, stupid. You don't have to be extravagant in the things that you do. Start small. Figure out how much of your world needs to be shown to tell your story, and build from there. Build that part out, build what you need immediately to tell your story, and expand as you go. You don't have to have everything right off the bat, especially for a D&D campaign. The one thing I will always say though is, when you set a rule to your world, be consistent with enforcing that rule. Don't try to bend it or break it for your own advantage or gain. That's one thing that's always going to break immersion, is whenever you make a decision for how your world operates and then you change it to fit your needs. So if magic is one of those things that is frowned upon in your world, don't make it conveniently not for your own purposes. It's that kind of thing.
Make sure that you have reasons behind everything you do and you're consistent in those reasons. Because you actually reminded me of a one-shot I ran with magic being outlawed, but one of the NPCs using magic. The players tried to call out that, well, this NPC is using magic, why can't I? The NPC didn't know they were using magic. And I made that a completely known thing.
As long as it is thematically, appropriate and not just like a, in my I'm not saying this. I'm just generically, if you make a decision like that, don't make it DM bullshit. Make it thematically consistent to the story and make it have a significance. Like a player, a character not knowing that they're using magic, like that can be interesting. That can be a fun way of providing a unique character to your party. So that's kind of like how I mean with being consistent is don't conveniently abuse your rules, but like, if you have storytelling to do, then you can use your rules also to your advantage.
Yeah. Like when you're showing those rules, show them as like, okay, that's a plot point.
Yeah.
Why doesn't he know?
Warforged, like it's actually kind of funny that Warforged are very rare in my world, but my party has 2 of them. So it's very interesting to deal with. But both of the way it worked out great is both Warforged are vastly different between each other. Because one's a druid and has like tree roots growing out of it and things like that. So you can kind of tell, even without knowing the origin of this Warforged, that the origin of this one is very different than what might have been in the past. And then the other party member is more of the traditional Warforged, but has its own quirks and thematic differences as well, to kind of make you question how they are in existence because of how rare they are.
But you could also explain that away with the fact that Warforged might be naturally attuned to the adventuring life, so they'd be more commonplace in that sort of setting, opposed to everyday sweeping the shop floor sort of thing.
And that could be, but with the lore that I have established, with how they're created and the civilization that created them, and there haven't been any new Warforged technically since, at least to the player's knowledge. It's a unique way for me to explain why are there 2 Warforged in this party when they're supposed to be really rare. But it's also going to make unique experiences for whenever they do travel to places where they haven't seen Warforged or they don't know what Warforged are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but you can, I don't know, you can, there is literally limitless possibilities that you can do with world building, in all honesty, be it geographical, cultural, in terms of what's there and what isn't. Like if and it also depends on what your players want to play. You're not going to set up a steampunk world with steampunk lore when your players want to possibly do a high fantasy Lord of the Rings style campaign. It's not. It would be 2 sides of a very different coin.
Yeah, and that's all part of like your pre-session 0, figuring out what your players want, what kind of story they want to be involved in, what they're looking for as a campaign And also explaining to them like, hey, if you're doing a homebrew world, you're gonna have to find the players that want to play in your homebrew world, because there's some people that like they're may only be interested in doing like Curse of Strahd or Icewind Dale or or anything of like these pre-built worlds that D&D has to offer. A lot of people, like, as far as my experience, homebrew is just kind of like the staple, but like complete 100% homebrew worlds, they can be a challenge for your players because they're going to have to learn everything from you who created it, and they're going to have to interact with this world based off what you provide them. So you want to give them enough to have fun and explore, but also kind of give you some interesting perspectives of what you've created.
And don't be afraid to let their backstories kind of shape some of your lore, even if it makes it a little bit different than what you originally intended. There are supposed to be people that grew up in your world. They don't just poof out of thin air. They have to have come from somewhere for some reason. And sometimes that means making some minor alterations.
Yeah, and if you build a world, utilize it. One of the things that I've done is, before I made this world, I created a couple one-shots, and now I've actually just put those one-shots into the world somewhere. So like, they may come across the location of where one of my one-shots is set. So that has become part of the lore. Another things like, I create on TikTok, and I create D&D OCs. I've put every single OC I've made on TikTok is in this world in some capacity.
You know what? You just reminded me. Because I take a lot of inspiration from geography and stuff like that. There's a place called Old Man Store in the Isle of Skye, and when I visited it, well, I've seen it once. I'm going to be seeing it again when lockdowns are lifted, and I've made a headcanon for the future campaign where this is going to be the Land of the Dead. It's another planar area, but like there's next to no trees. It's very windy, and basically when you die, you wake up on this mountainside, and it's all kind of inspired by this geography right here. Center it a bit more for. Oh, I can't do that. But it's all based around this inspiration of this geography here, which is, quite frankly, when I've seen it before, and I'm going to go again with my partner, is it can be. Don't be afraid to take example from places like this that can be magical in itself. Not magical, but you can take example from it. Take inspiration.
And if anybody has any questions on like world building on a lore perspective or storytelling perspective, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like it's very open. Like there's not really any wrong answer to world building, especially when it comes to lore, because it's your story, it's your world, it's the things that you want to do with it.
Yeah.
Now there are, not necessarily rules, but guidelines on how to effectively make a world and make it unique and also, interesting and immersive, and keeps your players or readers engaged, and allowing for them to explore this world through your storytelling, and making sure you, like I said, being consistent with how you present the world. because if you think about like Lord of the Rings, very consistent in how it presents itself. And it's such a compelling story that it's become what it is. But if all of a sudden they changed something just to fit the narrative, it would have made that story less impactful.
I mean, Tolkien is a hard one to take an example from because he was a linguist.
Oh, yeah.
He was a massive linguist, and Lord of the Rings is told in the story form of him translating this ancient text, which is...
I guess a good author, honestly, a really good author for world building would be Brandon Sanderson. He's one of
also
my
Terry Pratchett.
Terry Pratchett.
Terry
yes.
Pratchett, fucking awesome.
But Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archives, one of my favorite series. I still need to read some of the books, but like the world building and just the history and how like he brings it all together and makes it intertwined and it interacts with the characters. It's really well done and it's consistent.
One thing with Terry Pratchett actually is a good example of building lore as he went along. Like he had the general world and he had a couple of countries, but every book that he released, it added more to the world and fleshed out those countries and their cultures and their geography and their... so he started off in the city Ankh-Morpork. If you haven't read Terry Pratchett at all with Discworld, he started off in just a single city, and then he did 42 books, 43, 40. I've read them all, I've lost count, but each book just added a little bit more, and the nuances. Be warned, there is like commentary on racism in there. It's not like throwaway racism. It's more of a commentary of the craziness and the idiosyncrasies of why these certain races within the world hate each other and why it's so stupid and why we should just leave it and abandon it. Just be warned when you're reading that. But as he's going along, he builds it up as he's going. Instead of having it in one big block, it's a continuous work in art, and it's probably why I fell in love with those books so much, is because I wanted to know more about this world. I wanted to explore it as I was reading through the pages. And he was consistent because he had like 6 different screens with previous books, and he'd reference in book 30, he'd reference make a reference from book 2, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much covers everything that I can think of as far as lore building. It will give you a foundation to start from. Don't try to do everything all at once. Don't overwhelm yourself and be like, oh, I need all these things. Like I said, I'm going to reiterate, start small, keep it simple, keep it consistent. Like those are the three number one rules. The top 3 rules: keep it simple, keep it consistent, and start small.
Yeah, I systematically look at the map as a whole. What event affected the whole world? Like, what was like the big bang for this world? And then I start focusing on like the smaller things. Like, okay, here's the country that they're starting in, and I focus on building that a little more, so that they have their starting point. They might not even leave that country for half the campaign if you don't want them to. And then you move on to another country and another, and you slowly build the world as your campaign starts to grow.
Does anybody have any questions?
I think we've talked them to death.
Yes.
I know this is a lot of information, and then, but it's one of those things that it really adds life to your campaigns and your DMing repertoire.
Yeah, having a map like this, having lore to look back on both as a player and a DM, it just adds a new level of immersion to it past just role playing with each other and doing combat and stuff and dealing with the main plot.
And like, I'm honestly considering writing either short stories or novels based off of what I'm creating here. So like it's always going to be an avenue for creation.
Yeah, and lore can be found in the most general places of like the Big Bang, and also small places like maybe there's a legend in this town about like a bear that comes out only on the full moon that eats small children.
Or maybe there's a legend of 3 kobolds in a trench coat that walks into town and steals bread from the bakery.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be big to be lore.
Or you can take people that you know personally and turn them into patrons. Yeah. Or NPCs.
Yeah.
A town that worships someone that can count further than the number 5, and they revere him as a god or her as a goddess, just because they can get to 6.
Why is that your go-to? Out of curiosity. I feel like you're speaking from experience, Joe.
You know what? I've actually had.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, cool.
I had a player that cast Wish, and he wished to be a god, but he wasn't very specific on what sort of god he was. So I made him the eunuch god, and people were running around after him, being like, just declaring him the eunuch god in front of everybody. He had a weird cult. He was the warlock as well. So yeah, that was an interesting end to the session because they still had wishes on the sword. So,
fair enough.
Of the things to wish for.
Yeah.
Be specific. But
yeah.
You guys have not had any more questions. So if you are ready to wrap up, you're a couple minutes out. I think you all did a fantastic job. Joe, you did a fantastic job running us through this. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you. Oh dear.
I think as far as a lore perspective, I don't have anything else to add. I think we're good.
Yeah.
I'll
say something.
Do you guys want to do your send off and tell us where we can find you otherwise than here? Because you all are in other things.
You've been listening to me speak a lot on this second half. I am Words for Sale. You can find me on Twitch every Wednesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where you will watch me guide my players through this world that you see in front of you in my campaign setting. I am also a part of a D&D campaign on Tuesday nights, That One Blonde Nerds, where I play a Dragonborn Ranger. Saturday, I'm here every other week, so not next week, but the week after. You'll see my face again. And Sunday, I am on Baxter and Andrew's Twitch, where we are going through a homebrew Curse of Strahd, which is fun. And you can find me on all the socials: Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, OnlyFans. And yeah, that's it.
Joe, why don't you give your plugs?
So for the first half, you were listening to me talk about nerdy things such as cartographic principles and geography. You'll find me over on Twitch, Heathen Gaming Table. I stream on Saturdays at 19:30 UTC. We're currently going through a Icewind Dale run through. We're now at level 4, and things are going to be getting interesting now. You'll also find me on TikTok as Cartographic Gunslinger. I'm going to be working on doing some running commentary of just nice talks about geography and thoughts as I travel through the lands in Scotland. Give you a nice view while I'm talking about it. And that's it, yeah.
All right, and I have been your headmaster, Do Good. I've done almost nothing tonight because I am not the best at world building, so I was a student tonight. You can find me on Twitch and TikTok at Do Good HVZ. I'm also very active in the lovely Ivy server. I stream a D&D campaign I'm in every other Sunday. Time is a little weird, but it's every other Sunday on my own Twitch, twitch.tv/dogoodhvz. Wednesdays, I'm at the lovely Words for Sales, Twitch being one of his players. And I will be doing other live streams on my own account. I think I'm setting up a Pokemon Nuzlocke soon. Maybe. So, thank you all for coming to this lesson. I know it was a lot to take in. I think next time we're going over... What are we going over next time?
Have you
Headmaster,
forgotten your
you-
own schedule?
I don't think we got this far, okay?
I think we did,
It's
but
okay. You're good.
I don't remember what you said next time was going to
You're
be
just
because
fine.
I was focused on this one.
Yes, I'll say you're just fine. Either way, you'll be back here in 2 weeks.
Yeah. I know one shot was going to be one of them. The other one I don't remember. You know what? We didn't get this far.
Cool.
Next
so
week,
2
not
weeks
next week.
curriculum will
In
be a
2
surprise. Surprise
In
curriculum.
2 weeks, we'll do one-shots and making NPCs.
Great. Perfect. I approve.
Superintendent approves.
Superintendent approves. All right. I think that's it. I'm going to have you guys raid dice creams. So if there's anything else, or if not, I'm going to have you guys go raid dice.
All right.
Okay, perfect. All right. Let's dice cream sandwich. Even though I know some of our chat is already there. All right. Have a good rest of your night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.